Hi, everyone. Welcome today to our InfiniTALKS series. We're really fortunate today to have Bill McManus with us. Um, uh, Thank you for the sponsorship with the Hartford Funds. Bill and I first met several months ago. Bill presented, he's a national speaker. He presented at our Commonwealth National Conference on this particular subject matter, something every one of us knows someone, uh, probably someone very close to us that's been affected by mental incapacity late in life. It's something I think we all inherently fear, but I was really enlightened by Bill's presentation that it's also something we have some control over. The more science educates us, the more we learn and know about brain health, the more control we have. So I'm really pleased to introduce Bill and this content today. If you have any questions about this, be sure to reach out to your advisor here at Infinitas. We can get you copies of information. We can get you a copy of this video to share on with others. But feel free to share this with friends, family, and those that you love. So again, thank you, Bill, for being with us today.
Tim, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Really excited to share this research with you. As you said, my name is Bill McManus. I'm a vice president of our Applied Insights team at Hartford Funds, and basically what we do, we handle, I call it the non-investment related resources that we have at our firm. So we have tremendous investment partners that manage our mutual funds and ETFs, and obviously that's a very important part of what we do. But we recognize that there's another side to the planning process. So in light of that, we've strategically partnered with some of the top thought leaders in the financial services and I'd say adjacent industries. And we work with them directing research, developing content, and then ultimately my favorite part, getting to deliver it to folks that we have listening today. Just to give you an example, because it really underpins what we're going to discuss today. For 2 decades now, we've worked with a project at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology called the Age Lab. Now, by virtue of the name, you could probably guess this Age Lab is studying, yes, aging, changing demographics, the impacts of extended life expectancies. If you go back to 1900, which in the grand scheme of history is really not that long ago, life expectancy in the industrialized world was less than 50. We fast forward to today, and the prospects of living into our 80s, 90s, and beyond is uh, pretty much expected. At the lab, they call that a longevity bonus. And what they do is they work with businesses and industry groups, rethinking and reshaping products, services, technology, how it's all delivered to this changing segment of our population. The way that I sum up the work that the Age Lab is doing is, as we all are collectively experiencing this extended quantity in our lifespans, we want to ensure that the quality is there as well. And I think I'd see a lot of heads nodding, right? Ultimately, that's the goal, right? That's really what we want. So we have a ton of great research from the lab, but we're really excited to introduce you to one of our newer partners around this topic of retain your brain. So we were fortunate to have met Dr. Mark Milstein. So Dr. Mark is a PhD from UCLA. He's a leading researcher in neuroscience, health, and happiness. And what Dr. Mark and others like him have done have really been able to provide us with research-based solutions to keep our brains healthy, to boost productivity, and to really maximize longevity. In addition to many, but one of the main reasons we were so excited to work with Dr. Mark is the research around cognitive health has gotten very hopeful. It's gotten very optimistic, and in a relatively short time frame, we see here on the screen from the quote from Dr. Mark, we have strong evidence that simple lifestyle interventions can dramatically improve brain health and lower the risk of disease today, tomorrow, and in years to come. The bottom line, and Tim alluded to it in his opening comments, what we're finding out is we we have a lot more control over our brain health than previously thought. So we'll see what Dr. Mark means by that as we go through the conversation. We'll talk a little bit about your age versus your brain age, how they might be a little bit different, the importance of brain health, and then lastly, how to age-proof our brain. How can we retain our brain? So to get things started, just as a baseline, so what we're finding is, your brain might not be the same age as you, right? We have our chronological age, the amount of years we've been walking this earth, but it turns out our brain age might be a little bit different. You can have someone who, let's say is 60 years old, whose brain might look a little bit more like somebody in their 40s or 50s. And we can also see the other side of that coin. We'll talk a little bit about why that might be. The other basis of a lot of this research is coming from new discoveries that we're making around folks that we call super agers. So I'm sure many folks listening in here are familiar with blue zones, areas around the world where populations tend to exhibit these outsized life expectancies. Well, similar research is uncovering these super agers, and these are people that are in their 80s and 90s that, again, through tests and scans, that their brains look a lot more like somebody decades earlier. What we're finding is these folks do a lot of the same things that we're going to talk about today. So, where do we get started? Dr. Mark put together a series of questions. Now, this is not a test, right? We're not going to plug factors into an algorithm and it'll spit out a number and tell us how old our brains are. Just a general check-in, a general assessment every once in a while. Number one, how well can I manage my day? Now, forgetting to pay a bill, forgetting an appointment every once in a while, that's fine, right? That just kind of happens in the chaotic world that we live in. But if we do notice that's happening with some increased frequency, that is something to keep an eye out for. Number two is how well can I remember important information? And this is another one that we're challenged in the world that we live in due to our reliance on technology. I don't know about anybody listening, but for me, if I have something that's really important that I need to remember, I actually don't bother taking the time to remember it, right? I put it in my phone, I put it on my tablet, whatever it may be, I can access it easily. And what we're discovering is recall is a little bit of a use it or lose it skill. And we just don't flex that muscle as much anymore. It's funny. I can remember both sets of my grandparents' telephone numbers from when I was like 11 years old, right? But if you ask me right now, I couldn't tell you my dad's number, my best friend's number, right? We just don't do it as much anymore. So Dr. Mark recommends putting ourselves to the test. Do that trivia night. If you have that to-do list, that shopping list, even if it is on the phone, just turn it over. See if you can remember it. We want to take some opportunities to, again, flex that recall muscle. Very similar to with the third one, how well can I move and maintain balance? So research has found that people that have optimal posture and balance can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 49%. I always sit up a little taller when I remind myself of that fact. But this is another one that's kind of a use it or lose it as well, right? So what Dr. Mark recommends is putting ourselves to the test in this regard as well. Dancing, golf, yoga, whatever it may be, anything that you can do to work on posture and balance, you're doing good things for your brain health. Number four is how fast can I walk? We're going to come back to this, but walking is very important. Research has found walking just 30 minutes a day, and that's cumulatively, not even at the same time, can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 65%. The other thing Dr. Mark recommends is picking up the pace a little bit. He says 4 to 7 minutes of that 30 minutes. If we can do it at a little bit of a faster clip, elevate the heart rate, cardiovascular health, directly tied to brain health. Again, walking, very important. And the last one, how old do I feel? I love this one. Again, research has found people that have a positive outlook on the aging process can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 45%. So kind of amazing, just the power of positive perception and what that can do for us. So, here's where the optimism and the hopefulness that I mentioned comes in because, unfortunately for a long time, if we had a challenging situation with a loved one, relative dealing with cognitive decline, we would tend to just go to these default statements. This just happens. It's a normal part of aging. There's nothing we can do about it. It's genetic, so on and so forth. The key statistic here, 95 to 99% of instances of Alzheimer's and dementia are not strictly genetic. Let me be perfectly clear. Genes can absolutely play a role. They can raise or lower risk, but they're not determinate. So that's what Dr. Mark means when he says that we've got a lot more control than previously thought. And obviously that's certainly great news. So let's talk a little bit about sort of what's going on up there. So our brains are about 3 pounds. Our brains do start to shrink starting at age 40, about 5% every 10 years or so. And our 3-pound brain makes 5 pounds of brain trash per year. Now, this brain trash is just broken down proteins, leftover chemical reactions. It's just a normal part of being alive, right? It just happens. But what we find is the more trash that's built up, the older the brain. So almost think of it like a busy downtown metro area, right? If there's just trash that's piled up on the sidewalk and nobody comes and cleans it out, eventually it's just going to be impossible to navigate and to get around. Similar thing here. We want to ensure that we're doing things to keep our brains clean, because a clean brain is a healthy brain, and we're going to talk about how that happens in a little bit here. Just to give you a visual, just an example of two specific types of brain trash, plaques and tangles specific to Alzheimer's disease. We see we've got on the left-hand side, three normally functioning brain cells communicating, working in an effective manner. On the right-hand side, we can see the plaques develop in between the cells and the tangles within. And that's where we start to see a disruption in communication and the symptoms that we recognize as dementia. Of course, there are certainly some planning considerations when potentially managing a challenging situation with cognitive decline. Average Alzheimer's patients survive 4 to 8 years. Some can live as long as 20. Just personal experience. Unfortunately, one of my grandmothers had severe Alzheimer's, and this was a while ago. And we planned based off of what the doctors were telling us, based off of the knowledge they had at that time, 3, 5, 6 years, and she ended up living 13. So you just never know, and we almost have a little bit of a paradox where we have these advances in medical technology. We can keep our bodies healthy longer. If we are managing cognitive decline, it could just exacerbate that challenge. So just something to consider. The cost, obviously, from a planning standpoint. Now we're seeing over $100,000 for skilled nursing home, and adding on top of that for specific memory care. And these are just national averages, right? So they can vary pretty widely depending on where we're located and the level of care that's needed. And all in all could be, pretty significant from a financial standpoint, but we all know there's a lot more that goes into it than that, caregiving, lost income, home modifications, so on and so forth. Really, what this does come down to, though, is if we just think about all of the things that we want to enjoy in life, all of the things that we've worked so hard for, time with family, travel, maybe still working, whatever it may be, all of that, it's so dependent on the quality of our cognitive health, which is why, we're so excited to partner with Dr. Mark and to bring this message, again, of hopefulness that we've got a lot more control than previously thought. So let's get into that, right? How can we age-proof our brain? What are these lifestyle interventions that Dr. Mark is mentioning? So there is 5 of them. They're all important, and there's certainly a cumulative impact in either continuing to or starting to incorporate these ideas, these things. But Dr. Mark does single out this first one as our greatest ally in our fight to retain our brain, and that is sleep. So sleep is crucially important. Recommendations 7 to 9 hours a night. There are some folks that do fine on less than that, actually called short sleepers. But for a vast majority of us, that 7 to 9 hours is going to be that sweet spot. We sleep in these 90-minute repeating cycles, and there's physical changes that happen to our brains while we sleep. So remember, we talked about the brain trash. So how do we take out the trash? It happens while you sleep. So tonight and every night, multiple times a night, while you're sleeping, your brain will actually shrink down to about 60% of its normal size and give itself what's called a brain squeeze. Sounds like something from a sci-fi horror movie, I know, but you give yourself a brain squeeze. It then creates space between your brain and your skull. Fluid then rushes up from your spine and gives your brain what is technically called a brain wash. It's called the glymphatic system. Again, it happens every evening. Give yourself a brain squeeze. This fluid comes up, washes that brain trash out. Then it gets into the bloodstream, kidneys, so on and so forth. But this is how we keep our brains clean. This is why sleep is so important, because this is the mechanism that our brain uses to take out that trash. So, recommendation, how do we ensure that this is happening? A couple tips from Dr. Mark. Number one is sleep in true darkness. So ask yourself when you go to sleep tonight, am I sleeping in true darkness, or am I sleeping in what we call modern darkness? Because what we found, researchers found, light pollution, even when our eyes are closed, and this can come from, certainly light from outside, a cell phone, an alarm clock, charging on, on the nightstand, so on and so forth, that can actually impact your blood pressure, insulin response, pulse rate, all things that might inhibit your ability to fall asleep and get into those states of sleep where that wash happens. So anything you can do, basically the darker the better. If you have blackout shades, eye masks. I've been wearing eye masks for a couple of years now, and it's anecdotal, but it's made a tremendous difference in the quality of sleep that I've gotten. I do have a travel tip. I'm sure I travel quite a bit for work and for fun. I'm sure a lot of folks do as well. Hotels usually have really, really good blackout shades. They usually work really, really well, but they never close all the way. There's always like that little gap where the light comes in. Take the hanger in the closet that has the clips on it to hang pants and turn it sideways. Clip the blinds together. You'll get the best night's sleep on vacation, I promise you. But bottom line here is the darker the better. On the flip side of that is we want to get natural light early. So there's been Nobel Prize winning research around our sleep clock. Essentially, it turns out you're getting ready for bed when you wake up in the morning. So Dr. Mark recommends trying to get, like 10 minutes, exposure to 10 minutes of natural light within 30 minutes of waking up. Doesn't have to be outside, but we just want that exposure to the natural light. We need to let our bodies know that it's time to be awake. Last area, chilling out for better sleep. So, if you've ever been in a warm room, you're tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, that's your brain and your body desperately trying to lower its core temperature. So there's no magic number. It's all going to be relative. But if it's a little bit cooler, much more likely to fall asleep and stay asleep. So we get through those cycles where that brainwash happens. Just a couple other tips that I've heard from questions and presentations past. Screens, phones, tablets right before bed. Dr. Mark does recommend putting those down 15, 20 minutes or so. The challenge with those is that specific type of light can actually mimic natural light. So it might trick our brains into thinking that it's time to be awake. It's not time to go to sleep. So we do want to try to put those down. And then another question that I get is, what if I'm waking up in the middle of the night? Am I really disturbing that brainwash, so on and so forth? What Dr. Mark says, if you are waking up in the middle of the night, most likely it's happening during a lighter state of sleep. So not necessarily interrupting that process, but he does recommend, probably the hardest thing to do is resisting the urge to reach over to that cell phone or the alarm clock and see what time it is. Because once you do that, I know for me, the first thing that pops in my head is, well, now I only have 2 more hours of sleep, and then here's all the things I have to do for the day. So we want to try to take a breath, resist that urge, recognize it's fine to wake up in the middle of the night, see if we can get ourselves back to sleep. But again, sleep, really important component of brain health. Next area is diet. So there is a gut-brain connection, and what we're looking to do here is really reduce inflammation. Inflammation in our gut can spread to other areas of our body. There's actually a specific cell to the central nervous system called microglia, which is essentially the immune system for our brain. So it's going around, it's attacking brain trash, so on and so forth. However, if this cell becomes overinflamed, which can happen from inflammation from our gut, it will actually send a signal where it will not carry out its intended purpose, start attacking healthy brain cells. So clearly that's not something that we want to happen. So the recommendation, very similar to a Mediterranean type diet. Some folks call it the mind diet, but fish, cold water fish a couple times a week, Dr. Mark recommends. Extra virgin olive oil, nuts, very anti-inflammatory, beans, very, very good. Fruits and vegetables, right? We want to look down at our plate. We want to see a lot of colors. We want to eat things that are going to spoil eventually, obviously. Not sure if anybody listening has ever been to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, but they don't have it anymore, but they had on display an unwrapped Twinkie. And it was unwrapped for like a dozen years, and it looked delicious. It looks like it literally just came out of the packaging. That's probably not something we want to eat on a regular basis. Right at the ingredient list reads like a chemistry experiment. Probably not something we want to eat on a regular basis. Pretty good rule of thumb, trying to eat whole natural foods 80% of the time, right? If we're eating whole natural, not going to be perfect, but whole natural foods 80% of the time, doing good things for our gut health and thus our brain health. Number 3 is what we call the stress surprise. So, we're constantly told that stress is bad, and we don't want to be overly stressed. And that's true. We don't want to be overly stressed, but it turns out some stress is not only good, but essential for brain health. When we're stressed, cortisol is released, known to grow brain cells, specifically in the memory part of the brain. So, a little bit of traffic every once in a while, that's fine, but we want to manage it, right? We definitely don't want to be overly stressed. So, a couple tips, finding ways to change perspective. This rose thorn bud is a great exercise. It's just a kind of a reflective exercise where we just take some time at the end of the day, think about, what went really well, what could have gone better, and what am I looking forward to tomorrow? Just gives us a chance to pause. And now, the mainstream science around the benefits of breathing exercises. So breathing, meditation, mindfulness, quiet time, whatever works for you. Research has found, folks who hadn't before and start incorporating some type of, routine actually showed physical changes in their brain just in an 8-week period. Growth of the prefrontal cortex, where logic is applied, reduction of the amygdala. So really, really important component to managing that stress, which a little bit again is good, but certainly don't want to be overly stressed. The way that I think about it that helps me is, we're just go, go, go from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to sleep. We just got to give ourselves a break, right? We just got to take a beat. Dr. Mark says even just closing your eyes for a minute or so, a couple times during the day, can do a lot of good things for your brain health. Number three is getting moving. Number four, getting moving. We talked about this before, the importance of walking. Again, just 30 minutes a day can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 65%. We want to elevate the heart rate during that period as well. For us, this is just habit formation or continuation. So we put together this acronym CARS. So visual cues, something as simple as having the walking shoes by the front door might give us that extra kick when we might not feel so inclined. Taking action, parking a little bit further away from the store, from the office. I think we can leverage technology here. If you've got, fitness trackers, so on and so forth, that can give us reminders for walking, standing, so on and so forth. That can be very helpful. Reward, do something you enjoy doing, right? We don't want this to be a chore, right? It should be something enjoyable. And then lastly, I think tied into that is support, right? Having somebody to exercise with, walk with, whatever it may be, certainly makes it much more enjoyable. I myself need a lot of accountability, so that's helpful in that regard as well. But the key here is just ensuring that we're getting plenty of motion in on a daily basis. Last area, cross-train your brain. So the key here is we want to learn new things. And I emphasize new because oftentimes this conversation comes up and people say, well, I do crossword puzzles, I do, Sudoku, brain games on my phone, and that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing any of those. However, if you're consistently doing crossword puzzles and Sudoku, you're basically just getting really good at crossword puzzles and Sudoku, right? You're building on a skill, not necessarily learning something new. The reason that we want to learn new things is actually two things happen in our brain when we do so. Number one, norepinephrine, which is a chemical. It actually squirts in our brain, helps to break up brain trash, so we have a more effective brain wash. And the second thing is myelin, which is the coating around our brain, actually builds up, and that helps speed up cell-to-cell processing. So those two things happen when we learn new stuff. So, pick up a book, podcast, documentary on a subject that, is completely new. Two things that have proven to be extremely effective in this regard are learning to play an instrument or learning a new language. The frustration that comes along with those actually really good for our brain health. If you think about it, you can check off a couple of the boxes that we talked about today with certain activities. Dancing, for example, dancing's great because you're learning something new and you're getting in physical motion and activity, working on posture and balance, so on and so forth. The last bullet point, I'll just finish up with this because it's really important, is socialize with friends and meet new people. Obviously, in this context, when we meet new people, we learn new things about them. They might turn us on to new subjects or ideas, things to explore, so on and so forth. But this whole idea of the importance of our social network, I mentioned our long-term relationship with the MIT Age Lab, and you know, any challenge or opportunity that's associated with, successfully navigating longevity, the solution almost invariably comes down to the quality of our social network, right? The social network is what keeps us engaged, active, motivated, forms the basis of our support system in many, many instances. The word that the MIT Age Lab uses around our social network is the word intentionality. Are we intentional about our social network, new people, young people? It really is an important aspect of quality of life. There's actually been a longitudinal study on happiness done, and it's been done by Harvard. It's the longest study of its kind. They've been doing it for 85 years. And what they found was the number one determinant of happiness was, not success or wealth or anything like that. It was the quality of the relationships that you have. Number one determinant of happiness. So we think it's a really important component, ties into a lot of what we talked about today. One thing that Dr. Mark does emphasize as well with this regard is he encourages all of us to regularly have our hearing checked. And if there's a challenge, we want to address it. Folks that have mild untreated hearing loss increase their risk of dementia by 2 times. If it's more severe, that goes up to 5 times, just the potential pullback, lack of engagement, lack of learning. So that's something that we really want to check and to certainly address if there's an issue. But again, the key here is we just want to learn new things. So hopefully you learned something new today. I just throw this in as one question about supplements, because this does come up often. And what Dr. Mark would say firstly, anybody who's working with a primary care physician, if they're recommending supplements based off of testing, absolutely follow the doctor's orders. But, Dr. Mark would like to see us try to do things as naturally as possible. Sometimes supplements, the advertising can get a little ahead of the science, not as highly regulated as FDA medication, could interfere with other, medications. So, particularly when it comes to like sleep and diet, things like that, we want to do it naturally. Dr. Mark does tell a pretty funny story around this topic. I'm sure everyone has seen plenty of advertisements for, memory boosting supplements, and, how effective they can be. And Dr. Mark was giving a speech one time, and a gentleman came up to him afterwards and was raving about this memory care supplement. My recall is so much better. I just feel much more sharp, much more in tune with the world around me. And Dr. Mark was like, that's wonderful news. That's great to hear. Just out of curiosity, what is the name of the supplement that you're taking? And the gentleman looked at him kind of blankly and said, you know what? I can't remember right now. So take that one for what you will. But again, want to try to do things as naturally as possible, like we talked about today. So just to recap, your age versus your brain age might be a little bit different. We've got a lot more control over that than previously thought, how important it is to keep our brains clean and healthy. And then lastly, those 5 areas of how to age-proof our brain. I'll end with this quote from Dr. Mark and then a little follow-up. A sharp mind into older age isn't just a bit of luck, it's within reach for most of us. So I think that's just tremendous news to hear from the research that Dr. Mark and others are doing. Just as a follow-up, I know we went through that pretty quickly, but Tim, we've got a workbook that we can certainly make available to anybody that goes through sort of the Cliff Notes version of what we talked about today. Anyone who wants to take a deeper dive, Dr. Mark's book is called The Age-Proof Brain. So you can get that anywhere that you buy books. Again, it's called The Age-Proof Brain. It's a great read. And then, lastly, just thinking about the 5 areas, for me, it's just little tweaks here and there. Can I get a little bit better with diet? Can I get a little bit more consistent with exercise, learning new things, so on and so forth? But I think, again, the key here is, we've got a lot more control over our brain health than previously thought. So with that, I'll just end my formal comments with just a huge thank you, Tim, for having me. And certainly, anything else you need, we're here to help out in any way that we can. Appreciate it.
No, we truly appreciate it, Bill. Thank you for your time today. I was when you were talking about stress, obviously managing stress is important. So if your money or the economy's stressing you out, talk to your financial advisor as well. Perhaps even if we can't fix the economy, we can certainly have a good discussion about your position. So just one of those things that came to mind. All great points. Again, thank you so much for being with us today.